All right, so you know how everyone always says you are what you eat?
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of taking that idea to a whole other level in this deep dive.
Uh-huh.
We're going to be talking about how our diet
Right.
might have shaped how our brains evolved.
Interesting.
Yeah, specifically, we're looking at this thing called DHA,
Okay.
which is an omega-3 fatty acid, and we mostly get that from seafood.
Makes sense. Seafood. So, like, the idea that eating fish could have helped us evolve.
Yeah, exactly. We're basing this deep dive on an article from PureClean Performance.
Okay.
They talk about the work of this Professor Michael Crawford.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, and he's got this really fascinating theory that access to DHA-rich seafood
Like, eating lots of fish.
uh-huh,
Okay.
played a huge role in how our human brains developed to be so complex.
I mean, we are pretty good at thinking compared to other animals.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, did we eat our way to intelligence?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, and it makes you think about modern times too, right?
Oh, totally.
Like, what if our modern diet is actually making us less sharp?
Ooh, interesting.
Like, are we getting dumber because of what's on our plate?
A little unsettling, right?
Yeah, but you can't deny it's like really interesting to think about.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So to get why this theory is so kind of mind-blowing,
Yeah.
you got to start with what DHA is, like at the basic level.
Okay.
So it's like one of the most important building blocks for those membranes
Like brain.
of your brain cells, yeah.
Okay.
And it's like especially concentrated in the frontal cortex.
And remind me, what does the frontal cortex do again?
Oh, it's like CEO of your brain, you know.
Yeah.
It handles all the high-level thinking, decision-making, all that good stuff.
Gotcha.
So you can see why DHA is so crucial, right?
Yeah, so it's like the VIP ingredient for a really efficient brain.
Exactly.
But if it's that important, why can't we just make all the DHA we need,
Right.
like, on our own?
Well, that's where the whole evolutionary puzzle comes in.
Okay.
So land mammals, us included, we're just not as good at making DHA as marine creatures.
Oh, so like fish and dolphins and whales and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Huh.
Our bodies can convert some of the stuff we eat into DHA,
Okay.
but it's not like the most efficient process.
I see. So we can kind of make it, but not as well as the animals that live in the water.
Right.
Okay.
And, you know, Professor Crawford, he points out that marine mammals, you know, your dolphins,
Yeah.
they have way bigger brains compared to land mammals that are like the same size.
So like a dolphin and a wolf, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
And that's because they're constantly eating DHA through their diet.
Wow. So it's like they're, what, eating their way to bigger brains?
Pretty much.
That's wild. So are you saying that our ancestors, like the ones who live near the coast,
Yeah.
if they were eating a lot of seafood,
Mm-hmm.
they could have had like a cognitive advantage,
Yeah.
like a brain power boost?
That's exactly what Professor Crawford is arguing.
Wow.
He's saying, imagine, you know, way back when early humans are migrating, they're following the coastlines.
Okay.
Their diet is packed with fish and shellfish.
So they're getting tons of DHA.
Tons of it, yeah.
Okay.
And that could have, like, supercharged their brain growth.
Wow.
And that set the stage for, you know, complex thought, language,
Yeah.
all the things that make us, you know?
So basically something as simple as what our ancestors ate
Right.
could have been this like key factor in making us human.
That's the idea.
That's amazing.
It is pretty wild.
But here's the thing. Okay.
Yeah.
If that's true, if that coastal advantage thing really happened,
Uh-huh.
where does that leave us today?
Yeah.
Like, we're not all living by the sea,
True.
and we're not eating fresh fish every day.
Right.
Has our, like, modern lifestyle taken us away from this brain-boosting diet?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right? And it's what Professor Crawford calls cognitive devolution.
Cognitive devolution. What's
It's
that?
his idea that modern diets, you know, often low in seafood, hogging all that processed stuff and refined oils,
Yeah.
he's saying it could be making us, well, less intelligent.
Wait, are you saying our brains are actually shrinking because of what we eat?
It might sound crazy,
It kind of is.
but there is some evidence to back it up.
Really?
Yeah, studies have actually shown that modern human brains are smaller
Yeah.
than our Cro-Magnon ancestors.
How much smaller are we talking?
Well, their brains were, get this, up to 1,700 cubic centimeters,
Oh,
while ours today average around 1,336.
wow. Okay, that's a pretty big difference.
It is.
But is there really a direct link between that smaller brain size and, like, our modern diet.
Right.
What about other stuff that could be going on?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated, right? It's not like one single thing is the cause.
Sure.
But Professor Crawford's argument is that this shift, away from DHA-rich foods,
Okay.
that's a major contributor.
Okay, and remind me why, again.
Well, think about it. The brain uses a ton of energy, right?
It makes sense. It's always working.
In DHA, it plays a crucial role in how brain cells actually make that energy.
Oh, interesting.
So it's not just about structure and signaling, it's about fueling the brain, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like this, our brains need this constant energy supply to work, right?
Yeah.
And DHA is what helps make that energy production more efficient.
Okay.
So if you have less DHA, that could mean your brain's not producing energy as well.
Wow, so that would impact, like, everything.
Pretty much, yeah.
How quickly we think, how we learn.
Exactly.
I mean, that's given me a lot to think about.
And that potential decline in brain power, that's what has Professor Crawford worried. He sees a connection between our modern diets and things like rising rates of mental health issues.
Oh, wow.
And age-related cognitive decline.
Yeah, that's scary.
It is. And while it's complex and there's a lot of factors involved,
Yeah.
the role of DHA, that's like a key piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. Okay, I'm definitely getting the bigger picture now, but I've got to ask, we've talked a lot about, what happens if you don't get enough DHA?
Right.
But what about the good stuff? Like, how do we make sure we're getting enough of it?
Well, the most obvious way is to, eat more foods that are rich in DHA.
Okay, so lots of seafood.
Exactly. Fatty fish, things like salmon, mackerel, sardines, anchovies, all great sources.
Okay, but what if you're not a big fish person?
Yeah.
Are there any other options?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Algae-based DHA supplements are getting really popular.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, those are a great option, especially if you're vegetarian or vegan.
Right.
And some foods are starting to add DHA too, like some eggs, fortified milk, things like that.
Cool. So there are options out there, even if you're not, like, eating salmon every day.
Absolutely.
But you know what? You mentioned something earlier that I wanted to circle back to.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Professor Crawford's vision for sea-based agriculture.
Oh, right?
Can you remind me what that is again?
Yeah, it's a really cool idea. Basically, it's like copying how the ocean's food web works.
To create a sustainable source of DHA and other essential nutrients, too.
So instead of just fishing, we're growing our own food in the ocean.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, like imagine these huge underwater forests of kelp. It's a type of seaweed.
Yeah.
Super packed with nutrients, including DHA.
Oh, wow. So we could farm kelp for brain power.
Pretty much.
That's incredible.
It is pretty mind-blowing.
And it's good for the environment too, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's the other great thing about it.
It's amazing to think about the possibilities. Thanks for taking us on this fascinating deep dive.
Of course, happy to share what I know.
This is just part one, though.
Right.
We'll be back to talk more about DHA and its impact on our brains.
Looking forward to it.
So make sure you tune in for part two.
Definitely.
And don't forget, you are what you eat, so maybe it's time to add some more brain-boosting foods to your diet.
Couldn't agree more.
See you next time.
So, welcome back to our deep dive on DHA and how it could be like a secret ingredient for a powerful brain. Yeah, last time we were talking about how Professor Crawford thinks that not eating enough DHA might actually be making our brains smaller over time.
Right, that whole cognitive devolution thing.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild idea.
Definitely.
But like, is there any real science to back it up?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good, because it sounds kind of crazy at first.
I know.
So what kind of research are we talking about here?
Well, there's a whole bunch of studies out there, and they all point to how crucial DHA is for your brain to work, right?
Okay, like what? Give me some examples.
So one thing they've looked at is how DHA affects, like, your actual cognitive performance.
So how well your brain works.
Exactly. And they've
Right.
found that people who have higher DHA levels tend to do better on tests.
What kind of tests?
Oh, tests that measure things like memory, attention, how fast you can process information, that kind of stuff.
So, like, if you eat more fish, you'll ace your exams.
Well, it's not quite that simple, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
It's more like there's a measurable difference in how our brains work based on how much DHA we're getting.
That's pretty amazing.
It is. And this is even more important, during pregnancy and when babies are really little.
Oh, right, because that's when their brains are developing like crazy.
Exactly.
So what does the research say about that?
Well, they found that mothers who have enough DHA in their diet during those crucial times.
So while they're pregnant and breastfeeding,
Yeah.
Okay.
Their babies tend to have better cognitive development.
like they're smarter.
Yeah. And they even have higher IQ scores.
Wow. That's incredible.
It is, and it makes sense, right? I mean, if DHA is so important for building a healthy brain,
Yeah,
then it makes sense that those early years would be, like, super crucial.
totally.
But that also makes you wonder, right,
About what?
what happens if we don't get enough?
Ooh, good point.
Like, what are the downsides?
Yeah, it's just that we're not as sharp as we could be.
Well, Professor Crawford thinks it could be way more serious than that. Yeah, he's saying that DHA deficiency could have some pretty far-reaching consequences.
Like what?
He thinks it could be a factor in a whole range of cognitive issues.
Give me some examples.
Okay, so we're talking learning disabilities, ADHD, even an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease later in life.
Whoa. Okay, that's pretty scary.
It is, and it makes you realize that this isn't just about, being a little bit smarter.
Yeah.
It's about potentially preventing some really serious problems.
Definitely. So it's not just about reaching our full potential. It's about protecting ourselves from some pretty scary stuff.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the downsides of not getting enough DHA. But what about the flip side?
What do you mean?
Like, what can we DO to make sure we're getting enough of this brain-boosting stuff?
Well, the easiest way is to just eat more foods that are rich in DHA.
So, like all that fatty fish we talked about before.
Exactly. Salmon, mackerel, sardines, all that good stuff.
Okay, but what if you're someone who just doesn't like fish?
Yeah, good point. There are other options, too.
Oh, good. Like algae-based DHA supplements are getting really popular.
Yeah, I've seen those at the store.
Yeah, they're a great way to get your DHA if you're vegetarian or vegan or just don't like fish.
And are there any other foods that have DHA in them?
Yeah, some foods are starting to add it in, like some eggs and fortified milk.
So even if you're not eating a ton of fish, there are ways to get your DHA.
Exactly.
But, earlier you mentioned something else that I thought was really interesting.
What's that?
Professor Crawford's idea for sea-based agriculture.
Oh, right, yeah.
Can you remind me what that is again?
Sure, it's basically like creating these underwater farms.
Underwater farms.
Yeah, so imagine like these huge forests of kelp growing in the ocean.
Kelp, like the seaweed.
Exactly, and it's full of nutrients, including DHA.
So we could farm kelp for brain power?
Pretty much.
That's amazing.
It is pretty cool. And it's not just kelp either. We could also build artificial reefs.
Artificial reefs? What are those? They're basically like underwater structures that provide a habitat for fish and other marine life.
Oh, okay, so it's like creating a whole ecosystem underwater.
Exactly. And then we can harvest the fish and other seafood from those ecosystems.
So it's like a win-win for both human health and the environment.
Yeah, that's the idea.
It's amazing to think about the possibilities.
Oh, wow. It's pretty mind-blowing.
This has been a fascinating deep dive so far.
It has been interesting, hasn't it?
Yeah, I'm really starting to see how important DHA is.
Me too. It's not just about brain power, it's about our overall health.
And potentially preventing some serious problems down the road.
Exactly.
So what's next? What else should we be thinking about when it comes to DHA?
Well, in part 3, we'll talk about some of the specific studies that back up these claims.
Oh, cool. So we can see the actual evidence.
Yep. And we'll also talk about what Professor Crawford's work means for us today.
Like how we can use this knowledge to make better choices for our health.
Exactly. So stay tuned for part 3.
Will do. All right, so we're back, and we're diving deeper into the science behind DHA and all its brain-boosting potential.
Yeah, and like we were saying, these ideas, they've stirred up some debate.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a pretty big claim to say that what we eat is actually changing our brain size.
Exactly. So let's get into the evidence. Like, what does the research actually say?
Yeah, let's break it down.
So one area of research that's really interesting is looking at the direct impact of DHA on how your brain functions.
Okay, so how they do that?
Well, a lot of studies have shown that people who get more DHA in their diet, they tend to score higher on these cognitive tests.
Cognitive tests, meaning like...
Tests that measure things like your memory, how well you pay attention, how fast your brain processes information.
Oh, interesting. So there's actual data that shows DHA can make a difference in how well our brains work.
That's what the research is suggesting, yeah.
That's pretty wild.
And you know what's even more compelling?
Right.
When you look at the studies that focus on pregnant women and infants.
Oh, right, because that's when the brain is developing so rapidly.
Exactly. And there's a really strong connection between how much DHA a mother gets during pregnancy and breastfeeding.
Yeah.
And her child's cognitive development.
So, like, the smarter the mom eats, the smarter the baby.
Well, it's not that simple, but, there's a link.
Yeah.
Babies born to mothers with good DHA levels, they often have higher IQs and just better cognitive function overall.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty powerful stuff.
It is. It really highlights how important those early years are.
And it makes me think, we talked about what happens if you don't get enough DHA?
Right.
What does the research say about that?
There have been studies linking low DHA levels to a bunch of different cognitive challenges.
Like what?
We're talking learning disabilities, ADHD, even an increased risk of Alzheimer's later in life.
Wow. Okay, that's pretty serious stuff.
It is. And while it's important to remember that DHA deficiency isn't the only cause of these problems.
Yeah, of course. Lots of factors.
Right. But the research suggests that it could be a big piece of the puzzle.
So this isn't just about being the best version of ourselves. It's about potentially avoiding some really difficult health issues.
Exactly. And it brings us back to Professor Crawford's whole idea of cognitive devolution.
Right, the shrinking brain thing.
Yeah, and while it might sound a bit dramatic, the research he's gathered really does make you think about the long-term effects of what we eat.
Okay, so we've talked about the evidence linking DHA to brain health. But what about the claim that our brains are getting smaller?
Right.
Is there anything concrete to back that up?
Well, like we mentioned before, studies have compared modern human skulls to those of our ancestors,
Okay.
like the Cro-Magnons, and they do show a difference in brain size.
So our brains are actually smaller.
That's what the research suggests.
Wow. And while we can't say for sure that it's because of our diet,
Right, it's complex.
Professor Crawford's research does point to that decrease in DHA-rich seafood as a possible factor. So it's not just a theory. There are real physical differences that support the idea that our brains are changing.
It's pretty fascinating, isn't it?
It is, and kind of scary, too.
Yeah, it makes you think about what might happen if this trend keeps going.
Right. What does that mean for the future?
Well, it definitely underscores how important it is to keep researching this and to make sure we're getting enough DHA.
Okay, so enough with the doom and gloom. What can we do about it?
Right. Well, we've talked about eating more seafood and taking supplements.
Any other strategies?
Well, one exciting area is sustainable aquaculture.
Remind me what that is again.
It's basically finding ways to raise fish in a way that's good for the environment,
Okay.
but also produces fish that are high in DHA.
Oh, cool. So we can get our brain food and protect the planet at the same time.
Exactly. And it could make DHA-rich seafood more available to everyone. And then there's Professor Crawford's vision for sea-based agriculture that's still gaining traction.
Underwater farms, right.
Yeah, kelp forests, artificial reefs. It's all about working with nature to create sustainable food sources.
And it's not just a pipe dream, right? There are actually people working on this.
Yeah, researchers are looking into the potential of kelp forests and artificial reefs to produce food, but also help with climate change by absorbing CO2.
Wow. And some companies are even figuring out how to grow algae just for DHA production.
It's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah, it's like we're on the edge of a whole new way of thinking about food.
A food revolution.
And it all comes back to Professor Crawford's work on DHA.
He's really sparked a lot of innovation in this field.
This whole deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. I'm walking away with a totally new perspective on how powerful food can be.
Yeah, it's not just about calories and taste. It's about feeding our brains what they need to function at their best.
Exactly. And it's inspiring to think that we have the power to shape our own evolution through what we choose to eat.
I agree. By making sure we get enough DHA, we're not just taking care of ourselves, we're setting up future generations for success.
And who knows what other incredible discoveries are out there waiting to be made.
Yeah, what other brain-boosting superfoods are just waiting to be discovered?
It's exciting to think about.
It is.
Well, thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the world of DHA and brain evolution.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about this stuff.
It's been an amazing journey, and I'm so glad we could explore this together.
Me too. And I hope this inspires everyone listening to learn more about how food can impact their health and well-being.
Absolutely. And maybe even inspire some future scientists to make even more groundbreaking discoveries.
That would be amazing.
Thanks again for joining us, and until next time, keep those brains fueled and those minds curious.